Steve Huter, and I work for an organization called the Network Startup Resource Center, NSRC. My first experiences with internet networking in South Africa go back to the early 1990s. I was working with a man named Randy Bush, who had been quite active already in the early days of internet development in South Africa, which I learned, largely through his colleagues, Vic Shaw, Paul Nash, Alan Barrett, Chris Pinkham, Jaco at Rhodes, Pat Terry, computer science professor at Rhodes. And the first story that I ever learned from Randy about the earliest day email to South Africa dates back actually to 1987. Pat Terry was part of a Modula 2 language programming committee that had these international meetings annually, and Randy was active in that committee. And in 1987 at Timberline Lodge in Mount Hood, Oregon, Randy hosted one of these Modula 2 language development meetings. And as the group came together, people they came in from Australia and Japan and Europe and various places in the US, and Pat from South Africa, and everybody started exchanging ideas and talking about this and that. And then Pat looked around the room and said, "How in the hell do you guys know all this stuff? Where did where have you been discussing this?" And they looked at him and said, "Email." And he was like, "Email? What's that? How do I get it?" So Randy fixed him up with software on a big old floppy back then for FidoNet software, and said, "Take this home and install this and call this number." And next thing you know, Pat sent a message to Randy in 1987, and it was the first email message from South Africa. And Randy was in Portland, Oregon, and so they started a little bit of exchange, a little bit of collaboration. And soon thereafter, of course, a number of other colleagues at Rhodes became quite interested in this and decided to, get on the bandwagon, so to speak, and start getting access to email. This went on for another year or so, almost 2 years. Mike Lowry had become involved by then, and a number of others, some were grad students back at the time, Alan Barrett, Chris Pinkham. And the next phase of the story that I remember was that I think it was 1989 when Randy saw that the scaling of the number of users in South Africa was growing between all the South African universities to a point where they wanted to move to use CP. And the reason for that was primarily because FidoNet software, this very simple store and forward system, had a header format in its message structure that was not compatible with TCP/IP. And already at that time, Randy saw that the internet was eventually going towards TCP/IP. So he proposed, let's cut you guys over to use CP. That will scale much better, and then end users, can use whatever they want for their email clients, and the batched, compressed use CP email exchanges will just happen smoothly, and as the transition to TCP/IP happens, it'll be seamless. So this progressed in 1989, and they made this cutover, and by then Mike was actively involved, early day Uninet and all that kind of stuff, and they cut over, and that led to a proliferation of email to more South African universities. Soon thereafter, 1990-91, University of Zimbabwe started getting an email feed from Rhodes University, University of Zambia, University of Namibia, and I said Zimbabwe, so there were at least those four that then started getting their first connections through their computing centers, and then that spread out a little bit to computer science, engineering faculty, math faculty primarily initially, but eventually, more users in other departments came along. So Rhodes was a massive hub for the origin of the internet in South Africa. And with that mix of people, more cool, smart people started getting engaged in the technology. And then another year or two goes by and people are all looking at TCP/IP. So Randy helped engineer a 64 kbps link from Rhodes University to Portland, Oregon via satellite link. And on November 12th, 1991, that link was turned up, and South Africa was on the internet as the second country in the continent to connect. Tunisia had just connected in October '91. So soon thereafter, again, started mushrooming and more interest, more uptake, and they decided we need more bandwidth. So they went and they were monitoring the connection, and when they went from 64K to 128K, it took literally seconds to fill that pipe. and the rest is history, as they say. Chris Pinkham traveled from South Africa to Oregon, to Portland, Oregon, and spent about a year living with Randy and working for RainNet, Randy's internet service provider, which was the first wholesale internet service provider in Oregon and southern Washington, state of Washington. And so Pinkham learned, all the aspects of, building out services, the financial model, all the stuff, working with Randy, doing a whole bunch of, internet geekery plus business development. Chris went back and then led a small group with Paul Nash and Alan Barrett and a few others that essentially became TIXA. As many of you know, will be the first internet service provider in South Africa. And they built that out and had great success and eventually sold it to UUNet. And I believe at that point, Chris bought a sailboat with his wife Christine and took a rather long adventure. And Alan Barrett continued, working in industry, and Paul Nash, and by then, the academic network also was really starting to grow, and the notion of interconnections and starting to build what really became the first incarnation of the National Research Education Network, TENET, moved along in the late 90s, and then by 2000 officially launched as the first NREN in South Africa. Coincidentally, about the same time, KENET, the Kenyan Education Network, was also launching. And so those were the first two of these research education networks in the region. What I remember next is, there was pretty considerable build out of TENET, and over roughly the next 5 years, part of it was the human network, more faculties, more departments, CSIR was in the mix, and there was a whole bunch of other groups that started contributing to this. And then when the CCOM cable came along, and before it was even turned up, I believe, Duncan Martin was on it, and as the head of TENET, he saw what a tremendous opportunity there was, and he basically went straight to the CEO of CCOM and a couple of the key players and made a bid for 20-year IRU on the cable for a very low price. And the challenge was, if you can get all of the South African universities to contribute for this amount, we'll ink the deal. And within 2 days, I think, Duncan had enough commitments from enough South African universities for more than twice what was really needed, because there was so much pent-up demand and so much desire to pump up and really get on, everybody wanted to get off super expensive satellite links and get on fiber. There's nothing better than being on glass. So with that cable landing, they were able to do that. And when originally the offer, I think, was to Marseille, and Duncan, again, savvy man, negotiated, no, we want London, Telecity London, we want to be kind of in the heart of where we can connect with Géant, the European, NREN, and have access to all of that, Internet 2 peering, and then have access to all the U.S. universities through these arrangements. So Duncan really, was a major player in the evolution of RNE networking in Southern Africa, because not only did that happen with with TENET, soon thereafter, the guys, Victor Chalo, Meoli Kashorta, the guys running KENET, took a look at this and essentially replicated a slightly smaller version of the model, and they too, then were able to connect directly in Europe, and that started aggregating demand, essentially creating a buyers club, to get the universities all, on much higher bandwidth for much lower prices. So essentially, TENET was the ISP for the university community at that time. KENET became the ISP, for the Kenyan community. And I tell those two in part because they've really been great partners in helping galvanize others in the region. So now we've got the UbuntuNet Alliance, and that's 14 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa that have formed a regional network, and many of them, now Zambia, others now connect through South Africa, and then that traffic all heads up to Europe, etc. So really dynamic leadership from South Africa in galvanizing what we see as today's network. Now, Sanren, came along in the middle of a lot of this too, and building out the national terrestrial fiber network, and works today, I believe, in great partnership, with Tenet in operating, these networks for the benefit of South African students and faculty. As what I understand is that there's a concerted effort to now try and also reach out to more of the lesser connected universities, outliers from the big cities, and try to make sure that they're also benefiting from this arrangement. So my group, NSRC, has worked with a lot of these characters over the years on infrastructure build out, tech training. We currently have some joint programs with Tenet to do training programs. We did one at University of Pretoria a couple of years ago, and we've got more in the pipeline to try and ramp up more technical capacity in the current and next generation of internet operators in the research education community of South Africa. So now with the current leadership of Duncan Greaves and others, South Africa continues to be an important leader for R&E networking in Eastern and Southern Africa. A recent initiative that has started about is trying to improve the performance monitoring of these networks now that we're getting large bandwidth and big pipes. When you have packet loss on those, now it's really felt. When it was the old days and thin satellite links, performance was not going to be great, and people just expected that. But now with large data transfers and square kilometer array and all these things that people are talking about, even a very small amount of packet loss can be an issue. So there's something called Perf Sonar, which is a toolkit with basically a suite of tools, networking tools, that can be utilized for performance monitoring, and then collecting a bunch of data that can be utilized for troubleshooting problems, analyzing issues, and essentially analytics of the performance. So Sanren has been real active in building out Perf Sonar nodes at the various points of presence with Tenet. NSRC, my group, recently helped instrument Perf Sonar across 11 nodes of Kenet's network in Kenya. And when they want to be able to start testing performance in the different links and essentially between the UbuntuNet Alliance, they've now started to work together to build a Perf Sonar mesh so that they've got neighbors, so to speak, with whom they can collaborate and test performance. And so it's starting to grow, and Uganda, the Research Education Network of Uganda, which is also getting some assistance these days from South Africa, maybe next in that community. And this all eventually results in a much more robust regional research education network for Eastern and Southern Africa, with South Africa and Sanren and Tenet providing quite a lot of engineering leadership. And I would like to give special acknowledgement to Vic Shaw. He really was the early day visionary that saw where a lot of this was going, and then Jaco and Pat Terry, building a team around him, and the whole next generation, Alan Barrett, Paul Nash, Chris Pinkham, and the rest of the people that grew out of that, Mike Lowry, but I think everyone would agree, Vic really played a tremendous role in that early day, light the spark kind of person. So I want to pay homage to him.